You had the opportunity to work for two of the most brilliant minds in the history of the business, in Eddie Graham and Bill Watts, at the early stages of your career. Can you compare the two as far as bookers?
They had the same philosophy,
mm-hmm.
but Bill was more like your dad. He'd knock the crap out of you if you did something wrong, where Eddie would, bench you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they were the same school, the old school way of wrestling and building up a territory. They took their time. They knew that you build it from the bottom floor and build the blocks up, and you could build a big building.
Yeah.
But they knew the building was going to fall down sometimes, and you had to rebuild it. So they were smart son of a guns.
Wow.
I mean, what a scary feeling to be a promoter in a territory. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The TVs, the money that it costs for that is just unbelievable.
I couldn't imagine the stress and the pressure.
Jeez.
I had this written down, but I guess since we just brought it up, we did a shoot interview with Billy Jack Haynes.
Yeah.
And he thinks that his theory was that Eddie Graham committed suicide because Dusty took all his guys and kind of was going to leave him with a bankrupt territory. What do you think about something like that?
I don't think so. I don't know what the situation was, but we were doing really well. I was down there, Jim Neidhart, the Cuban Assassin.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Hayes was there. I mean, we had a great territory.
Yeah,
and we were going to all the buildings and selling out all the places. So, but when I first got there, it was down.
Okay,
but we were building it up, and it ended up being a heck of a territory. So I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think there had to be some other reasons. I don't know, maybe it was sick or something and just couldn't handle it anymore, maybe. I don't know.
How did you wind up making the move to Florida from that point?
After working with Terry Taylor and, working my way up with Duggan and the coal miners match and all that, back in those days, once you did the jobs for all these guys, instead of going down and being on the bottom again and working your way back up, you left the territory and you started a new territory and became the top guy and, did that. So Bill Watts told me, he says, I think I got a good idea for you would be to go to Tampa, Florida and work for Eddie Graham. And he says that would be a great move in your career because Eddie Graham is one of the best workers in the business in his days.
Yeah.
So I packed up and moved to Florida, and Jim Neidhart was down there, who I was friends with, because Jim was in Louisiana.
Oh, right.
Him and Butch Reed were partners.
Yeah. So
I called Jim, and I said, Jim, should I come down to Florida? He goes, get down here, live with me. My wife's gone. We'll have a great time. So I went and lived with Jim down there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Now, what were your thoughts on initially meeting Eddie Graham and just memories of Eddie?
Well, I still remember a couple years before that when I first got to Florida and wanted to work for him.
Yeah.
And I met him then, and he was like, "Hey kid, you haven't been in the business long enough to be here, but he's just a hardcore guy,
Yeah.
And so it was pretty exciting, the turnaround where they actually wanted me.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a good feeling, and I was down there when Eddie died.
Yes.
And that was bad because all my conversations were with Eddie.
Yeah.
And I think he liked me, and we talked all the time. But Mike did a great job,
Yeah.
After Eddie died. It was a terrible thing.
You touched on it briefly, teaming with Jim Neidhart in the territory.
Oh,
Florida.
It was fun.
Yeah.
It was a whole different world with Jimmy.
Yeah.
We had a good time.
Yeah. Yeah. Another guy I threw out there briefly, Billy Jack. He was in the area when you were there. What do you remember of Billy Jack?
Billy was a great guy.
Yeah.
Bill was kind of scary because, he was a tough, strong guy. And you want him to be your friend.
Yeah.
And he was. He was a good friend.
Yeah. What about Kevin Sullivan?
Kevin Sullivan, I got along great with Kevin.
Yeah.
We made a lot of trips together.
Huh.
One trip we had, we went to the Keys. It was me and Neidhart and David Sierra and met Kevin down there. We were up for about 3 days straight drinking. Oh, it was a good time. Kevin's a great guy.
Yeah.
Good mind too, smart. You know, and I think he learned a lot of that from Eddie Graham and Dusty. You know.
Then down in Florida, you guys had a lot of matches. You and Jim with the Guerreros.
Yeah,
Chavo
and Hector.
Yep.
Oh man, were they easy to work? Yeah, it was fun. And you know, being in you go to California and wrestle those guys, and they had every relative in the world out there, and I mean, they were over so good, and they could do anything. They were really fun to work with.
Wow. Now, you talked briefly, you mentioned Michael Hayes. You guys wrestled the Freebirds. I think you wrestled all three at one point.
Yeah.
And finally, Terry
Down
came
in Tampa?
Yeah. Towards the end. What do you remember as the match?
Well,
with
we
the
had
Freebirds?
cage matches. We had everything. And, you know, they were fun to work with because they joked around the whole time when they ran. And they were easy. I mean, every match that you had, it was so easy. You knew you weren't going to get hurt.
Yeah.
You know?
Going back to your childhood, were you a wrestling fan growing up?
Big time wrestling fan. My dad used to take us to the matches with Vern Gagne.
Okay.
And I used to watch the Crusher, the Bruiser, Baron von Reschke, you know, all those guys. So I was a fan.
Who did you enjoy? Who was your favorite when you were a kid?
When I was a kid, probably Larry the Axe Hennig and Dr. X, I think, was one of my favorites because he was so mysterious.
Wow.
Figure 4 leg lock.
Okay.
I think I put that on everybody in elementary school.
Speaking of school, I understand you went to school with guys like Nikita Koloff, John Nord, Kurt Hennig, Rick Rude, Tom Zank, Brady Boone. I hit them all.
How'd you know all that?
I do my homework.
You heard some other interviews.
I do my homework, yes.
Yeah, in fact, we all kind of grew up together.
Okay.
And being in Robbinsdale, all the guys that were athletes and everything, they all hung around and were pretty close together. It was a close-knit group. And we used to bounce at a bar called Grandma B's, and that's how we got into wrestling, was bouncing at that bar. Eddie Sharkey was one that got us in.
Oh, okay. So did you all get in together then?
Kurt Hennig got in a little bit before us because his dad was a wrestler, and we got in probably about a year or two after he did. Then we all got in together.
Now, what was Eddie's training like? What do you remember about that?
Oh, it was brutal. Yeah. You know, we trained at a church basement, and we had a wrestling ring that was with wooden railroad ties and had mats on top of it. And Eddie every day would say, okay, next week I'll get in the ring with you guys. Well, it was me, Rick Rude, Scott Norton, Brady Boone, all of us guys. And we were doing suplexes and slams and everything. And every time we walked out of there, we were half crippled.
Wow.
And from the time we started, Eddie always says, next week I'll get in the ring. The next week he'd say it. Never ever got in the ring with us because he was scared that we were going to hurt him back then. Eddie's the greatest guy in the world.
Yeah. Why do you think so many out of that class became so successful?
I don't know. I think it was just, being so competitive and everything. And, playing football and hockey and baseball. Every one of us were athletes. And it was like when we got into the wrestling, we all said we were going to make it. But Eddie Sharkey did help us out a lot. He brought down Ole Anderson. And Ole Anderson saw us all, and we were probably the first guys that were 300-pounders that actually, could fly around and take arm drags and all that. And when Ole came down, he took Animal, the Road Warriors, Joe, he took him first down into Atlanta. And then from there, it turned into, to Hawk. And then at that time, I went to Hawaii with Stu Hart, sent me over there, and it ended up not being Stu Hart. It was his son that was ribbing me and sent me to Hawaii. That's another story.
Oh, okay.
But anyways, so all of us got in different ways like that.
Wow. Well, what happened? Let's talk about the story. What happened with the big rib to Hawaii?
Well, after being in Eddie's camp for so long, and it was like everybody had to take their turn leaving the camp. And I was getting so antsy. So I sent out all my pictures and everything to everybody because I wanted to leave. I wanted to leave home. And I sent one up to Stu Hart, and then I got a phone call from Brett's brother, who had a voice, it sounded just like Stu Hart. And he says, oh yeah, we got a big show in Honolulu, Hawaii coming up, and he named off all the names who was going to be there. And he says, see, Mrs. Maivia at a certain address, and you'll be all set up, and your plane tickets will be at the airport and all that. So I was excited. Here I'm 20, 21 years old, going to Honolulu, Hawaii for my first matches. Well, it ended up being where I got to the airport and I called Dean Hart, who was the one who was the River. He says, just get your ticket and we'll reimburse you right when you get there. He says, it's a great deal. And I'm thinking, well, what the heck? If it doesn't happen, I got a trip to Hawaii, I'm going to have a hell of a time.
Yeah.
So I get to Honolulu, Hawaii. I go to the address that he says. There's not even a building there.
Wow.
So I thought, well, shoot, I'll just stay here for a couple weeks and see what's happening. And, because I already knew there was wrestling there. And then I could knock on the doors and try to get in there. And that's kind of what my thought process was. So I started training at the YMCA in Honolulu, Hawaii. And that's when I met Mark Lewin and Steve Rickard. Okay. And at that time, I was so mad I felt like I was going to kill Dean Hart, Stu Hart, Owen Hart, Bret Hart, everybody. And then later on, it ended up we laughed about it and everything because that's what got me into the business.
Really?
Yeah, because of Dean Hart ribbing me, that's what actually got me to make my move to Hawaii and get in.
Wow.
And so then when I was there, I had my first match there with Mark Lewin. And Steve Rickard, who was the promoter in New Zealand, he booked me in New Zealand. I was there for about 2 months. And we went from New Zealand to Tonga to Samoa to Honolulu and back and forth. And it was one of the best times ever in wrestling.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So all because I got ribbed.
Do you credit that to you becoming good by going on such a heavy travel schedule so early on? Every night you're practically wrestling.
Well, the guys I wrestled were, Mark Lewin was fantastic. He really taught me how to, do some things in the ring that I never even thought of. I thought you went out there and just killed everybody. Well, it was a little different when you wrestled him, who's been in the business forever, and he really smartened me up on what to do and not to do and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that's kind of was my start.
Exclusive shoot interviews right now on TitleMatchNetwork.com.